Well, good morning, everybody. What a nice smooth start today. That's a blessing too, right? Get us rolling right on time because today is a big day. So warning, you will need your pencil sharpened and ready to go. This one is gonna fly along, and we're gonna need to take a lot of little notes, not huge notes, but little notes. So make sure you have something to write.
It's a good day here in Green Bay, Karen. It's a home Packer game today, too.
I know it's a home Packer game today. That's exciting. So yeah, get your pens or writing instruments or pencils ready because we're going to fly through a bunch of things today. Up on the screen, you see just a little tagline for this section of the program, and it says, failing to brush your teeth is not a systems problem, it's an execution problem. You know, somebody taught you how to brush your teeth, right? Likely your mom. But if you don't get your teeth brushed, it's because you didn't follow through on the system, right? And so what happens with mental wellness is a lot of the times we just don't have systems. And so the Cornerstone program is really designed to give you a system of things to do when you have mental health challenges, right? So all you have to do is execute once you learn the system. So today we're gonna move right forward into module 2. And so we're on, if your handout is in front of you, page 12 of that handout, module 2 at the top, it says crisis survival, the skills for rock problems. So last time we talked about resilience. Hopefully you were able to take that home, think about that, ponder some of those 9 traits and see if you could improve on some of them. But today we're just going to move real quick right on to crisis survival. And so I'll read for you just the overview, okay? Sometimes there are moments in life that cannot be corrected or even worked on. They are just difficult. The best one can hope for is to get through them and do so as gracefully as possible to avoid more damage. Being able to know when to do that and how to accomplish it is also crucial. And also knowing the difference between survival and avoidance is mandatory. So what we're going to start talking about today is the fact that there are only 2 types of problems in the world, or crises. And you have to be able to discern which type of crisis you have so that you can execute the right system to help you. So we'll go into that in a little more detail in a second. The story, as I said to you last time, the program is really designed for us, not necessarily as a group to share a whole lot of things. It's really designed more educationally. And so the story there on page 12 about James is just used as an illustration so that we would have an instance or an example to talk about so that we don't have to talk about our own examples in front of our friends and family. So we'll leave that there for now. And I'll probably come back to it, well, I will come back to it in the next section. But the stories are always there for us to use, so don't lose track of that. All right, so I'm now on the top of page 13, where it says, practicing survival skills, what is a crisis? Okay, so if I asked you to tell me what's a crisis, tell me a crisis, we would probably have several different answers. Usually when I ask people that question, they'll say things like an earthquake, right? They'll start kind of with the bigger, let's say, crisis that we might think is more global or larger to a community. But when I think about crisis in the way that I want you to think about it when we talk about these skills is, it has 3 parts. Basically, it's a highly stressful or traumatic event, and you want it resolved now. And it's short term, it is not long term. So stressful, urgent, short term. That is what a crisis is. Now, why would it be important to know that? We want to be able to focus in and choose the right skill for the right thing. So there are crises that are long term, but they're really not crises. They're like problems, right? Sometimes bigger things come along and they're not short term. They're forever, or they're really long term. Okay, that's a separate set of skills. That's called reality acceptance, and that's the skill we learn next week to use on long term problems. So for now, we're just talking about short-term problems that don't exist forever. So sometimes that gets us a little confused. There are only 4 possible ways we can respond when we get into a crisis. Number 1 is to solve it. And we'll talk about how to sort that out. But solve it just means when I have a difficulty, just go ahead and fix it, right? Figure out what needs to be done and do that. Now that sounds pretty obvious, but sometimes we don't do that. We get ourselves into a crisis. Rather than solve it, we think about it, ponder it, we freeze, we do something called avoid. I would never, ever tell you to avoid something. You must always choose one of these responses, okay? So solving requires certain things. We'll talk about that in a second. Surviving is an option. You just get through it, right? If you have a difficulty, you might just need to survive it, just get through it. That's what today's skills are for. Number 3 is accept it. That's the one I just talked about. We use that for longer term things that we can't solve and that are too long to just survive through, right? We can't just keep in survival mode our whole life. So we need to learn to really accept some things. And then there's a 4th choice there, which people sometimes giggle at, but it's true. You can always just stay miserable in your crisis, right? That's an option. You can always just kind of stick with however you're trying to get through it, which may not be working, but it is a choice. You have that option. So what we want to do is try and figure out what are the rules. How would I know when to use which skill? So we go back to our definition. We say, yep, this is a stressful thing. This thing is urgent. This thing is short term. Then, yep, it's a crisis. And then we just ask 2 questions. We're sorting out, is this a rock or a Play-Doh problem? Can I solve it, number 1? And can I work on it right now? Or is now a good time? That's number 2. So if I have a difficulty come up and I can solve it and now's a good time to work on it, then I got to do that. That's a Play-Doh problem. I can make that into something. I can change it. I can fix it. Okay, so every time you come up against a problem, you're going to ask yourself, can I solve this? Is now a good time? If the answer is yes, you've got a workable problem, a Play-Doh problem. So go ahead and work on it, all right? But if you come up against something that's stressful, urgent, and short term, either you can't solve it or now is not a good time to work on it. You have what I call a rock problem or an unsolvable, unchangeable problem. And that means you need to just get through it until you can answer both questions. Yes, I can solve it, and now is a good time. Okay, so let's give you an example, all right? So not every crisis feels like a crisis to everyone. So the other morning, I was laying in bed. My husband gets up way early and goes to work, and so I'm in bed. And when he leaves, I can take my earplugs out because there's no one snoring anymore. So I took my earplugs out, and I was laying there, and I heard a bunch of scratching noises coming from the bathroom. I immediately think that's mouse. And I do not like mice. Mice are a crisis for me. I cannot get over them. And they're little beady eyes. I can't. So is it stressful to me? Yes. Is it urgent? Yes. I would like it gone now. Will it be here forever? No. Okay. This is short term. So it's a crisis. By definition, it's a crisis. Can I solve the fact that there's a mouse in my house? Now, that's a trick question, right? Because I could. I probably am a person who could figure out what to do to solve the problem. Can I work on it right now? Well, I better because I'm freaked out, right? So I answered yes at first. I said, I'm going to solve this, and I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to jam the door to the bathroom shut, and I'm going to shove a bunch of towels under it, and that will fix it for now. But it's not solved, is it? Right? So now I'm still in crisis because the problem isn't gone. It's still stressful to me. It's still urgent to me. It's still short term. But I can't answer both questions yes anymore. I can't solve it further, and I can't work on it now. Now, the reason I can't is because I'm afraid, right? So I need somebody to come and help me. So now I have to wait until my husband comes up. So this will be a crisis for a few hours, and it's a crisis I cannot solve. So now I need crisis survival skills so that I don't make it worse, okay? So I'm gonna pound this into you so that you understand each time you come into a difficulty, you have a choice here. There's only two kinds of things that are happening, and there's only 4 choices to make. You wanna make the right one so that you use the right skills, okay? So what's the goal of all of that? The goal is just to get through it without making it worse. So a lot of times people will say to me, these are great skills, Karen, but the problem is it never fixes my crisis. And I always say, well, yeah, we already determined that it wasn't fixable, right? So we're not trying. That's not the goal. The goal is not to fix the difficulty. It's to just get through it, okay? So I'm going to give you, let's see, about 20 different skills here, and this is where the pencils need to be sharpened. And we're going to fly through these, and you're going to think to yourself, okay, these are the skills I could use when I'm stuck with a feeling, stuck with a thought, stuck with something I can't fix. There's a lot of places for that, right? The story in the booklet talks about a young man whose girlfriend broke up with him, and she is very clear that she is done, and he's thinking about it all the time. Maybe you have family members that you worry about, or maybe you have financial crises that come up, or myriads of things, so many things. And if I asked you all, I think each of you would come up with some sort of short-term crisis that you could think of that you are in or have been in. So they're very, very useful, but don't think they're not working if they're not fixing the problem. Remember, the goal is just to get through without making it worse, okay? So making it worse, I'm thinking about it too much, I'm not able to focus on other things, I'm not sleeping, that's all making it worse. Then you need these things, all right? So we're gonna be now on page 14. Page 14, where it says distract skills. So these are 7 skills that will just help you keep your mind off that unsolvable problem, okay? So 7 different things that you could just be doing to make that goal of not making this worse. So we're gonna go top to bottom. Now, if you look real close, there's an acronym for this. The words, the first letter of each word going down spells out the word accept. That's kind of handy, so you can remember all of them. But the first one is activity. So number 1, I could just start distracting myself with some sort of activity. Could be anything. I call them distractivities. Get it? Distracting activities. Yeah. So get a distracting activity going. So this can't be just any old activity, though. It has to be something that fills up your brain, right? So I know people who can just sit there and crochet while they're doing like conversations or lunch, and to me that is, I can't figure that out. Crocheting for me would be a distracting activity. For some people it's not, it's mindless. So you need an activity that you know will fill up your brain. Some people will say exercise. That's good too if it fills up your brain. I have the opposite problem. If I exercise at the gym, I'll get on that treadmill, but I need my earbuds in listening to a podcast, and I'm probably still watching the TV and reading the subtitles and thinking about all the other people in the gym because I need really distracting things. So get an activity that you think would work that's really distracting. Now, your workbook lets you have space here to write down not only these definitions, but examples. So write down things that you think would work for you, because everybody's different. What's a distracting activity? Could be baking, could be those Sudoku puzzles, could be a million things, right? So distract from your unsolvable problem with an activity that keeps your mind busy. Next one is contributing. Contributing is the idea that I could get my mind off of my unsolvable problem by doing something for somebody else. Now, I had a student the other day say to me, so I think you're saying that the Bible is the best and the oldest psychology textbook. And I just wrote brilliant on her essay. Like, yes, God always said, love me, love others. Contributing was always part of the plan. So doing something for someone else is really mentally healthy too, right? So could be anything. One of the saddest things for me about the pandemic was we couldn't smile at each other. That's really contributing to someone else. You're looking at them, you're smiling, you're connecting to them. They know how you feel about them, right? Listening is a good one. Call up your niece at college. Just listen to how her week is going. Send a card, for heaven's sake. I love getting a card. It never happens. It's so wonderful when they come. Anything that you can do for someone else makes you feel connected, right, to people. And so when you're in a crisis, you can just take your mind off of it by trying to be helpful. Next one is comparison. So comparison is the idea that I could probably get my mind to a different place about this problem if I compared to a different time or a different situation. So I could compare to something that went on previously with me or that I know is going on with others. Now this can get a little tricky. Most of us, when we compare to others, we will come up short, right? So if that's what's happening, don't do it. That's why there's 19 other skills. But the idea is to look around and say, you know what, I'm grateful. There's gratitude that I can find by comparing. So for example, maybe your crisis you have now is not as bad as a crisis you've had in the past, right? You could think back and think, man, this is tough, but that was tougher, right? God got me through that. I'm sure he'll get me through this too. You can also compare with others. So when my son was young, he was 4 years old in preschool, and there was a family that had 4 children, and the youngest one was in preschool, and the oldest was in 3rd grade. And the father of that family died suddenly, and so my friend Lori was left with 4 kids by herself, right? And I just had the one. And sometimes when I was having a rough time with my son, I was, you know, man, how come we can't work this out? Or maybe I'm not a good mom. Blah, blah, blah. So sometimes I'd use comparison and contributing together. And I would think of Lori and I would say, okay, Karen, you need to not focus on the bad here. Lori's got a much tougher situation than you. So why don't you have her come over and the kids can play and we can sit and have coffee? So I just did comparison and contributing, and it got me out of my little mini crisis about, you know, how tough it was to be a mom, right? So anything that you can do that would give you that sense of gratitude or move you forward, that's a good distraction by comparison. All right, we're cruising on. Next one is opposite emotion or just emotions. All you're trying to do here is get another emotion going other than the one that you have in the crisis. Okay, so in the story of James in the text that we have in the handbook, he's sad. He's lost his girlfriend, right? So sometimes when we have an emotion, we will just indulge that emotion. We'll just let it kind of dictate what we do. We'll just be more sad, right? You know, sometimes I see the teenagers do that a lot. They just indulge themselves in this sad emotion all the time. That's not really what we want to do. That's probably going to make it worse. So if we're using a good distraction skills, we want to come up with some way to get a different emotion going. And a lot of you would have ways that you already do that. Most people say to me, the way I can get an emotion going real quickly is with music. That if I turn on a certain kind of music, it will change my mood to a different mood, okay? And it doesn't always have to be like a better mood, it just has to be different. So if I am sad, putting on some dance music, right? I happen to like Jimmy Buffett, fun to me, feels like the island. So I can just get another emotion going by turning on that music. Sometimes I'll have people who have been away from work to work on their mental health for a while, and they'll go back and they'll say, oh, it's going to be so stressful to be there. I'm just going to be anxious. Okay, let's think of a picture you could put on your desk that you can just look at, and then that'll remind you, make you feel different. So usually they'll say like a vacation photo. Right? I'll put that vacation photo on my desk, and when I look at that, it takes me back to a place and time that was fun, and that brings up a different emotion. So you just want to be thinking about what makes my emotions change, and if I'm in a crisis, that might be a way to help get me through it. All right. Next one is pushing away. So Pushing away is the hardest yet most useful skill here. And it's basically just looking at the crises that you have or the difficulties you're working on and asking those two questions again very specifically. So let's say I'm laying there at night and I come up with three things that are basically bothering me. Let's say finances, my kids, and my mother-in-law, okay? And it's 2 in the morning and I'm laying there thinking about these things. What I do is I just look at them one at a time. All right, so I'm worried about the upcoming tax bill. I'm not sure we have enough saved. Okay, ask the two questions. Can I solve it, and is now a good time? Can you solve the fact that there's maybe not enough money, or you're not sure if there's enough money for the tax bill? Well, you could go look at the accounts and see, right? Or you could move money around, and then you would know, yes, there's enough. However, the second question is very important. Is now a good time? Okay. 2 a.m., unless you're a third shift employee, is never a good time to be thinking about your difficulties, right? Because that'll make it worse. You'll be awake all night. So you need to answer the question, no, I cannot work on this right now. And then you mentally picture that goes up on the shelf until tomorrow. Sometimes I'll literally have people write it down and erase it and move it to another piece of the paper or a different piece of paper. I'll give you an example of how I've seen this work. So when I worked in college health, we had a young lady who came, and she was a very good student. And she got to college, and one of the things that happens is there's more time, right? In high school, you move from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing. And in college, that's not how it works. And so she had new problems of thinking about old difficulties. So she'd get real upset, real focused on things that had happened in her past. And they were traumatic things, that she had been able to file them away before. But now she couldn't. So, for example, she'd be sitting in chemistry class thinking about this old occurrence that was very, very traumatic. So we would do this. I'd say, okay, when you think about that, you just ask yourself the question, can I solve it, and is now a good time? And the answer was always no. No, I cannot solve that past crisis that's coming up. And no, now is not a good time because I'm in chemistry class. Put it on the shelf, okay? Now, remember I said I would never tell you to avoid anything. So at some point, we're going to have to look at those things that are on the shelf and re-question them. So you look at them again and you say, okay, is now can I do anything about it? Or is now a good time to work on it? And so for her, the answer was the only time that it was good to work on it was in journaling, which I would provide for her, prompts that she would do, or in talking to me. That was it for a while. So otherwise, it just went on the shelf. And she was very creative. She called it the purple box with the silver stars. She'd notice those thoughts, and she'd say, nope, that goes in the purple box with the silver stars. And I don't take that down until I talk to Karen. Okay? It's very powerful if you can get it to work, but you got to keep at this one. That's pretty tricky. But it works very well for difficulties that you really can't do anything about. Okay? All right, last two thoughts. So here we're just saying, we want to distract from our difficulty, and we can just replace that thought with a new thought. Your brain can only think one purposeful thought at a time. Did you know that? Seems like you can think a bunch of thoughts at one time, but really, you can only think one on purpose at a time. And so what we want to do is just put a little chink in that thought process and say, nope, I want to think about this. I want to think about this. That's one of the most beautiful things I think about Lutheran education. We are masters at teaching kids how to memorize thoughts that we want them to have because they're God's thoughts, right? So anytime I get in a crisis, I could just replace that crisis thought with a verse that I know, right? Or a mantra or a quote or something that I think might be helpful. If you don't have one, go ahead, find something, memorize it, and start practicing it. I will use the thought replacement skill in the grocery store line, stuck in traffic, right? Waiting for my son to text me back. I use these all the time, and thoughts is a good one. Mine that I always use, I couldn't choose a Bible verse, so mine is always, there is nothing that will happen today that together God and I can't handle. Somebody taught me that one, and I just hung on to it. I use it for everything. Every time I get in a crisis, I think that. It takes it away for a little bit. Sometimes I have to repeat it. All right, last one here is sensation. So if I want to distract myself from something that's going on that I can't fix, I could physically jolt myself out of it. We live in a state where 9 months out of the year, that means you can just stick your head outside, right? It's pretty chilly out there this morning. That sensation or that physical jolt would probably get you out of that crisis thought, at least for a little bit. Okay, so you're using any of these 7 things, you could distract yourself from the crisis that you're in. All right, now we're on to the next page, page 15. Like I said, we're flying along. Hopefully you're writing down ideas of things you can do. This one is improve the moment in your mind. So again, we have that acronym, improve, for all 7 of the skills. And these are, what's cool about these is you don't need anything except your body in order to do them. So sometimes, you know, I can't just turn on music if I want or start coloring something. Like, if I'm sitting in the doctor's office and they're 45 minutes late, I can't do that. So I have to use these types of things. So number 1 is imagery. Imagery is the idea I just take my brain elsewhere. I'm just going to imagine I'm somewhere else. Maybe you have some place that you just go to in your brain that would be helpful to that. Maybe a place you've been before, or a place you'd like to go and you just kind of daydream about it. Imagery is just that idea that I don't have to be stuck with this reality. I can just transport my brain elsewhere. Give yourself a little break. I always used, when we were growing up, my parents were both teachers and we would travel all the time. And we'd always stay at Uncle Ted and Aunt Elma's house. And I can still picture everything about that house. I could go on and on and on about Aunt Elma's house. But it was one of my favorite places because it was summer break, right? That was what I thought of when we went to Aunt Elma's house. So imagery. Next one is meaning. So the meaning skill is really set up to be, looking for what is in this difficulty. A lot of times when we get into difficulty, we will dismiss it and act as if it's not a big deal. Some of us do that. Like, we just sort of ignore it or sweep it under the rug. And that's not always the most helpful thing to do. Actually, finding meaning in difficulty is very helpful, right? And in the Christian church, sometimes, especially in conservative churches, we call that the theology of suffering, that I'm able to see God's purpose or God's hand even in, especially in difficulty. So I want to struggle with things. I want to find meaning. I want to continue to look for purpose. And when I do that, I survive better. So attaching meaning, finding meaning, thinking about meaning. That's sometimes hard to do when you're in the difficulty. But you might practice this one by looking backwards. So maybe you've had something occur in your life that you didn't want there and it was very difficult. But you might be able to look backwards now and say, I see something in that. I can see why that was there. I can see the purpose or meaning in it. Okay, that's a practice that's very helpful to people. Okay. All right, P, prayer. Hopefully you know a little bit about prayer. What's interesting about this is these skills are written by a woman. Now she's a Episcopal, but at the time she would say she was really uncertain, maybe almost agnostic, and understood, though, that there was a higher power. So when she talks about this, she often talks about it that way. We, of course, wouldn't talk about it that way. But that prayer is really a skill to be used, that God invites us, right, to bring all of our worries and cares to him. It's interesting to me how many Christians I see who, when they're in a crisis, forget this. They just sort of go into panic mode, and they just sort of skip over it. Don't forget prayer. Prayer is powerful. Prayer is a wonderful way to get your mind off of your problems. Stop wrestling the problems away from God and leave them there, right? So don't forget about it. Relaxation. Relaxation here just means I'm going to try and find a way to relax my body. Remember, these are skills we're just using our body for if we're in a crisis somewhere. So we might think about breathing skills. One of the things that happens when people are in crisis, they have breathing problems. One of 2 things will occur. Either they'll stop breathing altogether. I'm one of those. I tend to just stop breathing. Or they'll sort of panic breathe. real fast and shallow, right? Neither of those are very good to getting yourself through a crisis, right? They don't help your brain think better. So breathing can be really important. There's a lot of different techniques for relaxing breathing. I always teach what we call square breathing, where you're just going to think about a square out in front of you. And you could take your hand or you could just do it in your mind. But you just count to four times. So that on the first 4, you just breathe in. The second one, you hold it. The third, you breathe out. The fourth one, you wait. So I don't know if you can see me, but that's how it goes. You just go. Okay, and that's just to help regulate breathing. Sometimes in a crisis, start there. If other people are in a crisis, if you're with them, start there, because then you get some good thought going, okay? Next one thing in the moment, or one thing at a time. This skill is, again, the toughest, but the most beneficial out of the set. And what it's trying to point out is when we get in a crisis, we are likely adding things to what is actually happening, right? So the one thing in the moment skill is the reminder to say, I need to shrink this thing down to just this moment, not more, not adding from the past or the future, just now, okay? So I was telling this story at my church the other day, and my pastors were in the room, so I'm going to risk it, and I'm going to do it again. Sometime on Sunday mornings when I'm sitting in church, the crisis is that I find myself not paying attention to the sermon, right? All of a sudden you wake up and you're like, oh, I was totally not listening. It's a crisis. I'm supposed to be paying attention. That's a problem, right? So I need to notice that, drag myself back into the moment, not be distracted, and pay attention to what that guy is saying. So I'll do that. I'll just sort of look right at him, right? I'm just going to stare at him and do the thing. Another example is usually in arguments or difficulties with other people. If I get into a difficulty or a conflict with someone, most of us will make that bigger than it really is. We will project it forward and say, this is going to go poorly. They're not listening to me. We're not going to be able to get through this. Or they'll look backward and they'll say, see, this always happens. See, this person isn't willing, blah, blah, blah. Rather than just focus in on the moment, yep, this isn't going well. That is all. This is a way to just say, you know what, this is hard. I don't need all the other stuff. The more you work on this, the better it will be. It's a hard skill to get down. Your brain really works against you. It wants you to take in all those other things. But when you're in crisis, you probably don't need all those other things. So try and shrink it down to just now. What's going on now? Okay. 2 other things. If you're in a crisis, take a little mental break. Kind of like imagery. You could just think about something else, or maybe you literally are going to get up and walk out. First rule of anger management, take a mental break, right? So find a way to get a little space, but come back, right? Come back, keep answering your questions. Am I supposed to be working on this? Yes or no? Don't make it worse by just procrastinating and taking a vacation from your crisis forever. That's not fair. It's going to cause more problems. All right, next one is encouragement, or being your own best cheerleader. This one, there's a lot of good social science research on encouragement. Again, going back to the original and best psychological textbook, the Bible, of course, encouragement is a part of it. Encouragement, sometimes I'll start with people on Psalms. Just go ahead and pick a Psalm to read. That's pretty encouraging. And it's relatable, which is helpful. It's not just positivity for the sake of positivity. If you're going to be a cheerleader, we want you to cheer yourself on in ways that are helpful, in ways that are encouraging. So if you've been to a football game recently, I'm betting you did not hear the cheerleaders say, we think you can win, right? They're like, no, go fight, win. That's the type of encouragement you want to work on. And some of us have not been very good at that. Maybe we weren't raised to do so. But there's a lot of good science to say encouraging yourself will actually improve your ability, as opposed to discouraging yourself. So try and be your own cheerleader in a crisis. Coach yourself through it. You got this. You can do it. God's got you. That kind of thing. Okay? All right. Now, we are on, this is a little out of order. We're going to, there we go. So now we're on pros and cons, page 16. So remember now, we are in the category of saying, I'm not solving this problem. That's not why I'm here. So pros and cons are usually what people think of when they're trying to solve a problem, right? What are the pros of this decision? What are the cons or the not so good things about this decision? But here, what we're trying to notice is that sometimes the crisis is actually caused by us. Like the difficulty in my life is sometimes because of a behavior that I do. And so the pros and cons list here is meant to say, I want you to take in all the reasons for doing things, because it's important to notice them so that you can make a decision. So in the Christian realm, sometimes I think of this as the 100% sinner, 100% saint kind of conversation, like the good I would, I do not, that kind of thing. Because this is similar to that. It's pointing out the good you would do and the good you don't do. And it's a helpful tool just to kind of sort through. So what would be maybe a behavior that causes you to be in crisis? Here I'm going to use the behavior of isolation just because, A, I think it's been pretty applicable lately, and B, it's one that doesn't require so much specificity. But you might have a behavior that you want to put here instead. Like, I did this once with a group of 7th and 8th graders, and we did lying. The problem behavior I have is lying. You should see how quickly they can fill in these boxes. They know exactly what the pros and cons of lying are. So you could do lying, you could do drinking, you could do gossiping, any problem behavior that causes you to be in crisis, okay? We're going to do isolation. So for example, I might say that when I isolate, so I'm going to put that in there. There are things that happen when I'm isolating that I think are pros. So a pro of isolating might be no dealing with other people. That might be helpful. I might think that that's a good idea. That's a pro of isolating. If I don't get out there, I don't have to deal with people, and I think that's a pro for me, okay? How about the cons of isolating or the downside of isolating? Well, one of the big ones, of course, is loneliness. Okay, we could go on and on about loneliness and what it does to people and why that's a con for some people, and eventually it does become a problem. The loneliness can be a con. Now, the trick to really understanding all of this is to also look at the flip side of the story. So now I want to look at what are the pros of not isolating. So if I get out there, what's the good thing that could happen? Well, maybe I would meet new people, okay? Or I'd feel more connected. Or I'd stop thinking so much. Okay, so each of those is a pro or a good thing about getting out there. I'm not isolating. Okay? How about the cons? If I get out there, what's the downside? Well, maybe I'll feel socially anxious. I get real nervous when I go out, and I'll have to put up with that. Maybe people will ask questions, and I don't want to tell them kind of what's been going on or why I've been kind of laying low. Maybe I don't want to do that. Okay, so each of these boxes has its own fair reason. There might be very good reasons that you would put something in each of the boxes. But what happens is sometimes we get ourselves into a situation and we just go with the bad behavior because that's what we're used to. And it's worked, right? But in our heart of hearts, we know it's not the right thing to do. So the key is to find that bad behavior, work through all of these squares, for yourself several times, not just in one sitting, so that you have a whole picture of what you would do really when you think about it. When you're really, really thinking in your best possible mindset, this is the picture you have. This is what you really believe about that behavior. Then you can go back to it when you're feeling compelled to do it and say, wait a second. When I really thought this all the way through, this was not what I wanted to do. This was what I wanted to change, and here was why. So the compulsion to do some of these crisis-inducing behaviors is very strong. So we want to find a logical way to think through it so that our emotions don't make us do it. This one is really helpful with, addictive behaviors, things like alcohol or pornography, to sit down and really work through each of the boxes, because we can really justify doing things that are bad for us and for others. We can find a lot of justification and convince ourselves it's fine. So thinking this through will really cut down on some of those crises that you get out of your own making, okay? I know I said last time, but I'm going to say it again. Sometimes the temptation when we're in a group like this is to think about others and how they might use these skills. I understand that, and I think it's fair to share some of the skills, but really they're for you, okay, and for you to think through first. So make sure that you do, and if you're going to share it with somebody, that you understand it and have really practiced so that you can be helpful with it, right? Not that you're just kind of saying, hey, I think you need to work on that, okay? Well, all right. Now, I'm going to stop with all of that. Annotations, there we go. All right. Whoop. Wow, what am I doing? There we go. All right, now we're on to the next thing. All right, last set of skills. We're doing great. Self-soothing skills on page 17. So one of the things that I think is interesting to talk about is we know that the Bible provides us everything we need for salvation. What it doesn't always provide us is like rubber meets the road sorts of things. And so social science, free will, and reason help us kind of examine what does God mean by some of these things. And so you think about creation and all the beautiful things that we get to experience. What we've learned is they're very important. Experiencing your emotions, your feelings, your senses, they're very, very valuable. And so we want to be able to, even in advance of a crisis, even in advance of a difficulty, be building into our lives things that are soothing to us. So all you got to do is use your senses and figure out what are some things that make me feel good. What are things I look at, things I hear, smells I surround myself with, tastes that I have that I enjoy, touches that are helpful. It's all part of mental wellness. And the key is, what we found is it's not so much the quantity of this that you do, of this self-soothing, it's the intentionality. So choosing to pay attention to your senses is more important than the length or the excessiveness of the soothing. So, for example, I could, let's say in January, start a fire out in the fire pit in the backyard, burn some leaves, and just sit there for 5 minutes and do all 5 of these at the same time, right? I could be sitting there watching the snow, hearing the crackle of the fire, smelling the burning leaves, drinking my hot cocoa wrapped in a blanket, and I could do it for just 5 minutes. That is just as effective as a day to the spa. Sorry, ladies, I know I just threw you under the bus, but what's the point? The point is continuing to think through, am I able to build these things into my life, and why would that be helpful? It is possible to use self-soothing in a crisis sometimes. So let's say I'm in the middle of something, and it's helpful to me to just look at something that's soothing or hear a soothing sound like waterfalls or things like that. That is an option. But really, what's so interesting about the science is using self-soothing in advance of the wellness program is actually better. You will become less overwrought in a crisis if you've been doing this all the way along. So all this takes is a little bit of time, a little bit of attention to your senses, a little mindfulness, which we'll talk about in spring, to get you to kind of notice. Don't pass by all the beautiful things that are in the world. God created them for you. And so you want to be noticing and appreciating as part of gratitude practice to do that. Okay, so we did pretty well. We are at the homework section where it just says, hey, continue to fill in your personal ideas for each of those items, right? The pros and cons, improve, accept, pros and cons, all of that. Keep looking at your list, keep practicing, right? And then it says, hey, maybe here, write down a crisis and how you got through it. Which of the 20 skills did you use to make that objective, that goal, which just says, I'm getting through this without making it worse. That's all I'm after, okay? And then remember, just to use the correct tools for the correct moment. I just need to survive those unsolvable rock problems. That's what these crisis skills are for. Solving requires problem solving skills, and only use that on things that you know you can do something about right now. All right, next time we're going to talk about reality acceptance and what to do about those long-term difficulties in life. And that one's a little tougher. So hang with me next week. We'll finish that one up. Any questions? I don't know if we have time for that, but I'm all set for today. Agreed. All right.
I don't think there are any questions. Have a nice day. Thank you for.
All right. Blessings.
Thank you.
Bye, Vicar.
See you next week.
See you next week.